Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Chala, Perek Gimel, Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Chav Vav. We left off on Daf Chav Vav, Amud Aleph, Mamish, all the way on top of the Amid. We're dedicating today's class, L'Refuah Shalema, to Michal ben Nechamadina. And before we begin with the intro, just to close yesterday's shir, I looked in the Shulchan Aruch in Yored Deya, by Michal Gimel. The main thing is it's Simin Shin Chav Ches. Take, the Machaber says that the bracha that is made when the mitzvah of the separation of challah is done, prior to the mitzvah being done, is lahafresh truma, and that Amar writes af challah. In other words, he's not arguing with the nusach of the Machaber. That could be correct. That is an option. He also says that there is an option of saying lahafresh challah. If I'm not mistaken, that is what I am familiar with, lahafresh challah, like Ashkenazim following the shita of the Ramah. Okay, so the Mishnah, Halacha Aleph, had two parts. We concluded the first part yesterday, and today we are starting with the second part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that even if the entire flour is not yet mixed with the water, which means that you cannot call what you have in front of you tevel, which means you are allowed to eat achilas aray, but that does not mean that you may not separate challah. If you want to anticipate the separation of challah, not from the flour, not from the unmixed flour, but from the part that is already needed, you are allowed to do so. That's what the Mishnah says. As we will see from today's daf, that many people did it that way, but for a side reason. Since we don't want for challah to become tamei, I'm not talking about nowadays when it's already tamei. We're tamei, the food is tamei, everything is tamei. But when people were still on top of their tumantara, there was always a fear that as time will go on, someone else will come into the kitchen, someone else might touch it, something might happen that will bring tumah. And therefore, it was common practice by many people, as we'll see later, that they were mafresh challah as soon as they were allowed to, and they would right away put it aside, and that made them feel safer that the challah separated will remain in its state of tara. It's important to know that for other reasons for today's share. Now, the Mishnah is not saying that you should do it. The Mishnah is saying that kiven shehino isenas esamayim, from when the water is put in there and challah is separated, the challah separation will be effective even for the flour that's still unmixed, providing the Mishnah gives one caveat, that if the amount of flour in the bowl is in itself the minimum shear, if the unneeded flour has the shear of 5 revoyim, that's what the Mishnah says, then even though you are separating challah, which you could do, it's not going to be effective. This is very important. That's what the Mishnah says. Now, the Gemara, the half of today's share is going to be addressing an implied rule of the Mishnah. All the Mishnah was concerned was whether there is unmixed flour less than the shear, more than the shear. Less than the shear, the hafrashas challah will also be matir that if you have the shear of 5 revoim or more that's completely unmixed, you are mafresh challah from the little piece of dough that you already needed. That will be good for itself, but it won't be effective for the rest. The Mishnah never spoke about how much dough needs to be kneaded. Needs, not with the K, N-E-E-D-S. How much needs to be kneaded? The Mishnah never gave you a minimum amount, which implies that even if the amount that you needed is less than the shear, you still could be mafresh challah. Now that is something that's problematic. In other words, l'cha'ira, you would say that just like we have to look at how much of the flour is unneeded, whether it's something chashuv for itself or whether it's bottled, let's also look at how much was needed. Don't forget that you do need to have the minimum shear to be mafresh challah. The Mishnah doesn't give you such a demand for you to look into that. Mashma, and correctly so, implying that even if the amount needed is less than the shear, you can be mafresh challah. Now that will go into a machlokes that we already quoted between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, whether you are able to be mafresh challah even if you don't have the 5 revoyim, even if you have a lesser shear, okay, we paskin that we don't. When we have a suffix of what the pound shear is, we're mafresh without a bracha. But like we mentioned, by us, if you're mixing less than 2.5 pounds of flour with water, you're not even mafresh challah. The Rabbi Akiva does not subscribe to that. The Rabbi Akiva holds you could be mafresh challah. So we're going to first address that topic. We will be quoting a brisa that we're going to bring into our sugya. The brisa speaks about meiser rishon that did not yet have trumas meiser removed from it, which means that this meiser rishon is still called tevel. What happens if such a meiser rishon falls into chulin? So when it comes to truma falling into chulin, when it comes to trumas meiser falling into chulin, we know that if the ratio of chulin against the truma is 100 to 1, then the truma is going to be batel. Here we're speaking about not trumas meiser, tevel. In the case of the brisa, meiser rishon shaloin, that you didn't yet have the trumas meiser removed from it, because of the rabbinic rule that davar sheyesh loy matiren is oiser b'chol shehu. Davar sheyesh loy matiren is not batel. So tevel cannot become batel, even if you have the ratio. So there's a question, there's a machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Elazar ben Arach and the Chachamim, how to resolve it. And that machlokes will touch upon the question whether ein mevatlin isar lechatchila, or whether that rule will not be applicable to our scenario, as we will explain. So these are going to be two big topics of davar sheyesh le'maitirin is never batel, oiser b'cholshu, the sugya of ein mevatel isar lechatchila. We're going to speak about it in greater length. And finally, as we mentioned in the beginning, since people were concerned then, when people were generally tahor, and they wanted the challah to remain tahora, it was common that people would hire or ask as a favor for a female kohen, for a kohenes, to knead their dough and to be mafresh challah. It was a common practice because the family of Kahanim, they were very careful not to become tummy. They also, when they needed those, whether for pay, whether as a favor, they separated the challah at the earliest stage possible, as we explained. They were always afraid maybe the balabasta is going to walk in. The balabasta, let's say, is a nida, she's tameya, she's going to touch the dough. She separated challah, of course, from the kneaded part so early. Don't forget, what did we learn in our Mishnah? That if you have unkneaded flour, unmixed flour in the amount of 5 revoyim, if you separate challah from the kneaded part, even though they are in the same bowl, it doesn't help you for the unkneaded flour. That flour will be tevel at some point. So there's a certain stipulation that we taught these women to say. Anyone could say it. This is just what happened. In order for them to be able to be mafresh challah at a very early stage, even though there were 5 revaim or more left of unmixed flour, and it affected a heted, it was mated everything, as we will see when we learn this inside. It's a short daf in words, but it's loaded. So chavra daf chavav amud aleph, let's hit it. Kivin shehin oisenas asamayim. All what the Mishnah was concerned about was how much unmixed flour is there in the bowl. If you have 5 revaim or more unmixed, that remains unfixed. If you have less than 5 revaim of unmixed flour, and you cannot separate challah from flour, nevertheless, since in this bowl you began mixing, you are going to mix it all. You are separating challah from the dough, from the mixed flour. The hafrashas challah from the mixed flour will affect everything else. Will be mated everything else. Great. How much flour is mixed? The Mishnah never wrote, which implies that even if what you mixed is less than the 5 revoyim, you can be mafresh challah. So now we have a machlokes between a Shlakish and Rabbi Yechanan, whether our Mishnah only follows Rabbi Akiva, who says you could separate challah even from a lesser shear. You're not chayiv to, but you could. Or our Mishnah goes, L'divrei Hakol, that will be the first part of today's daf. So Rabbi Yossi b'Shem Rishon ben Lakish, focusing on the implied rule of the Mishnah, that you could separate challah from the needed part, even if the needed part is not in the amount of the minimum shear, even if it's less than that. Musman Zagin, that our Mishnah is only Rabbi Akiva, he Titanin on Taman. We're going to learn this soon. That the Mishnah says, not that you have to, you don't have to. You only have to take challah if you have the 5 revoyim. But hanoitel challah min akav, 5 revoyim in b'midois, tzipoidiyos is 1 kav and 1 roiva. That's just the way the Mishnah words it. That even if you only have a kav, by the way, it means a half a kav. It means even though you don't have the minimum amount, if you remove challah, Rabbi Akiva says it's effective. It's challah. The chachamim are the ones that hold that it's not effective. So yeah, your implied rule of the Mishnah is accurate, and therefore it only fits with Rabbi Akiva. Not ideal, okay, but our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, hold on. If you actually properly read the words of the Mishnah, it doesn't even seem to fit with Rabbi Akiva, because the Mishnah that we just quoted, that we're going to have in our pagination on Daf Lamed Tes, the Mishnah writes, Hanoitil challah min akav. B'di'evet. If you removed challah from a small amount, b'di'evet. The Mishnah does not formulate it in a way that leads you to understand that you should. You really don't have to. The Mishnah, our Mishnah writes that once you put mayim inside, once you begin to knead, you are mafresh challah. Our Mishnah seems to be saying that you should do it. Now, why should you do it? We said for a side reason. You should do it because if everything now is in a state of tahara, chaparain, before there might be tumah. But nevertheless, you don't even have the shear yet. So it's more than Rabbi Akiva. That's the Gemara's point. Klum, it's like a question. Klum amar Rabbi Akiva ela l'sha'avar, shema kitchila. Did Rabbi Akiva ever say that lechatchila you should remove challah from a lesser than the minimum shear? No, he did not. But the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh formulated the words over here is tchila, non-kaimen. The Mishnah is saying, kivin shehi noisenes asamayim, you take the challah, you remove the challah. So for which the Gemara answers, you're right. Our Mishnah is following the mahalach of Rabbi Akiva, but it actually goes more than Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yoina said in the name of Rabbi Chia, b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, these are the words, that Yardullah b'shitas Rabbi Akiva. Not that our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. It follows the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, but it's more than Rabbi Akiva. Look inside the top Rash, really on the right column. Yarad la b'shitas Rabbi Akiva, loishe Rabbi Akiva oimar kein. Rabbi Akiva never said that you should remove challah from any amount. He did not say you should. He said if you did it, it's effective. The Rabbi Akiva loikaman ela b'di'evet. Aval lechatchila loikaman. Aval Tana de Masnisen, according to Reish Lakish, Shoina Mishnah Zu, that what? Yorad B'shitas Rabbi Akiva. It follows the sheet of Rabbi Akiva that you're not bound to a minimum share, but V'yoiser me Rabbi Akiva. But it actually takes it more than Rabbi Akiva, which our Mishnah would hold that lechatchila you should be mafresh challah from any amount of dough that you made. And that's why the Mishnah Taka formulates it that way. The moment you begin kneading, according to our Tana, you have to remove challah. You don't have to. Have to meaning you could wait until you need the whole bowl. But because of the secondary reason that people were concerned that at some point everything will become tamei. So let me, in Yiddish, chaparain, let me seize the moment and separate challah. At least the challah I can put on the side, and the challah will now remain in the state of tara. That justifies you lechatchila removing it right when you start kneading it. You have the minimum amount of 1/24th and something to have the bereishis, remove challah. Will it affect the entire bowl? That's the only thing the Mishnah says. If what's unmixed is less than the shear, it affects everything. If when you removed challah, the unmixed flour in this bowl was the shear or more, that will have to have challah removed from it when that is turned into dough. You're with me? Very good. Atkan shitas reish lakish. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva v'yoisem Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, I completely disagree with you. The implication is accurate, but has nothing to do with Rabbi Akiva. Our Mishnah is Divrei Hakoli. And why is that? Kivin shihi noisenes asamayim. When you have a bowl, guys, don't forget, Aviv, in the bowl, you have the shear of flour. More, you have the shear. The bowl is mitztarif. When you begin, now you can't remove challah from flour. Okay, but the moment you begin to add the water, that means the moment you are needing, Rabbi Yechanan actually is maramazit, learns it from Aremes. Reishis Adisoi Secha means from when you begin making a dough. Beginning meaning that you don't even have the minimum shear needed. Doesn't matter. All of the parts in the bowl are counted in the beginning of the kneading. So if the totality of what you have in the bowl is 5 kav, 5 revoyim, a kav and a roiva, then you're chayiv to be mafresh challah. Not Rabbi Akiva. Everyone holds that. The only thing you have to look at is how much unmixed flour is there if you were mafresh challah early. And that the Mishnah says that if you have less than the shear, it's batul. Your hafrashas challah was effective for that as well. If you don't yet, if there is 5 revoim or more of unmixed flour, what you did is good. Even if what you removed was from less than the shear, from the perspective of the dough, you have the shear. Why? Because in the bowl you have the shear. You began to make a dough. From the perspective of the dough, you have the shear. From the perspective of the flour, it's great. You don't have it's not batel. It's amazing. You got that? In other words, you were saying that you are removing challah from less than the shear. But it's not only Rabbi Akiva, because from the perspective of the dough, you have the shear. How do you have the shear? Because you include the flour. Well, if you include the flour, then why wouldn't the flour now become matir by the hafrashas challah? No, you only include it to make the dough a dough that is chayiv to have challah removed from it. From the perspective of the dough, the flour is batel in it. It's like from God's perspective, we're part of Him. Das Elyon, no question. But that doesn't mean that from our perspective that we experience that we're part of God. We don't have that experience. We have a das tachten. From the perspective of the flour, if the flour has its own ego, if the flour has the shear, then the flour does not see itself to be part of the dough. Great.
Right?
Yes.
Saying for sure less than the shear, whatever.
You could.
Is good, right?
Yep.
Does that mean that he also subscribes to this idea where the flour and water are not really mixed, that he would still consider it all one dough?
So the Mishnah says clearly that if you have unmixed flour less than the shear, we consider it one. The Mishnah says that. So the hafrashas challah on the dough is effective for the flour. When that flour will get mixed, it doesn't have to have challah removed from it. It already had challah removed from it. That's a beautiful thing here. In other words, from the perspective of the dough.
That doesn't necessarily have to go with Rabbi Akiva's opinion.
No, that what I just said right now has nothing to do with Rabbi Akiva. Zero. That's what Rabbi Yechanan is arguing. That as long as we can argue that from the perspective of the dough, everything else in the bowl is part of it, and everything in the bowl altogether has the shear, has nothing to do with Rabbi Akiva. That's what Rabbi Yechanan is. Divrei Hakel. Gewaldig. Okay. Now, before we come back to our Mishnah, we're going to go off, and you'll see how we're going to bring it back to our Mishnah. And this is a braisa we spoke out in our words of introduction, that it's ironic how when you have clear truma falls into chulin. Midorais it's batal b'roiv. I'm talking all min b'minoi. Midrabanan, you have to have the ratio of 100 to 1. But if you have that ratio, Aviv, it is nullified. Then there is gezel hashevet. You have to take one and give it to the kohen. Seder. What happens if you have tevel? Stam, tevel falls into chulin. My friends, tevel is never batal. Why? Because it's a davar sheyesh lematirin. I want you to know that there's a machlokes Rashi and the Ran, just the big picture. Why do we say that davar sheyesh lematirin is not nullified? Rashi says it's a svara. Note, why rely on bittul? Wait for the heter. Davar sheyesh lematirin, let it become muted, and you don't need to rely on the bittul. The Ran says very different, guys. The Ran says that Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'mino is never batal. Even though we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, but the logic of Rabbi Yehuda we agree with, and that is that for something to become batal, there has to be a clash. When you have a clash, one overwhelms the other. One surrenders to the other. If everything is the same, if they're not clashing, there's no bittul. These are good words. So when you have heter and isur, it's a clash. even though apples, it's the same physical min b'minoi. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. You hear Yakir. But this is chulin. This is truma. Isser and heter clash. Different. So if the 100 of mutter overwhelms and the isser, let's say, becomes surrenders to it. But if the isser itself will become mutter, so it's not clashing. It has heter in it already. So how can it become bottled? That's the way that Ran explains it. L'may nafkamin, I want to say this because I just had this question. What happens if you have in your kitchen a keli? All right, let's say a person has a fork, and the house cleaner made the fork that was milchiks fleishiks. So you have a fork that you have to, big deal, you do hagala, it's a fork. So you put the fork on top of your fridge. Okay, Aviv. And then the same house cleaner or someone else finds the fork on top of the fridge. This is the machlekes between the shach. Whoever learns smicha learns this. You forgot it, but you learned this. That's what Toras Habai is. There's three opinions. And they put it with the other forks. If you're going to say it's a davar sheyesh le'matirin, because you can make hagala, then afilu be'elef le'batul, you have to do hagala and the whole set that you have in your. Or you're going to say davar sheyesh le'matirin is only if it becomes mutter by itself. But if you have to make an effort to be matir it, the way it is, it's going to remain asur. Then we don't apply the davar sheyesh le'matir, and this is the big machlekes, and it's dependent on the Rashi and the Ran, and we'll leave it at that. Let's go move it. The time is going too quick. So here we go. So the case of the Braisa is very simple. You had meiser tevel. Meiser tevel means aviv. Which meiser could be tevel? Not meiser sheni. Meiser sheni is never called tevel. Meiser sheni you have to eat in Yerushalmi. Meiser that's called tevel is meiser rishon that you did not yet have trumas meiser removed from it. So not even the Levi can eat it. It's basically tevel. And it got mixed into chulin, and I don't care the ratio. So that's the rule. The rule is that any tevel, in our case, meiser, since you could be matir the meiser rishon, how are you going to do it, Aviv? Wake up, my friend, by removing trumas meiser. So therefore we say, oiser b'cholshu. Now, what do you do now? So what do you do? So if it's not bottle, so says the Braisa, that means if this, let's say a Levi owns it, doesn't matter. If this person has other meiser rishon that wasn't yet fixed, and we know that meiser, you don't even need minamukav. That means instead of me removing aviv from meiser, here on my right, 10% from it, for it, I can remove 20% from it, designating that as trumas meiser for it and for the other pile. Means if you have some other meiser rishon that's still tevel available, amachaya, then then moitzi lefi cheshbon. No, it's you know that 5 apples of meiser rishon fell into here to this bundle of 100. 5. From how much do you have to give from that? 0.5, a half an apple. Say that. So if you can give a half an apple in another location and say that will become the trumas meiser for this, is good. What happens if you don't have that? Now look at the irony. Trumas meiser is bottled b'meya. Now you don't know where the tevel is. Doesn't matter. So the imlav, Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch says, what do you do? Yikra shem l'trumas meiser shaboy. You make a statement. In this big pile of apples, I have in it 5 apples that are tevel, meiser rishon tevel. I don't know where they are. Wherever they are, 10% of it, there you have to designate a place. They are somewhere. 10% of it in the north of it is designated as trumas meiser. That means that you designated its trumas meiser. So what do you have now? You don't have tevel and chulin. What do you have now? You have now trumas meiser, truma in chulin. If you have the ratio of 101, it's now going to become batel. And v'yala ba'achas umeya. Now, what's the chiddush of Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch? That you're separating trumas meiser, knowing that the moment you separate it, boom, it's going to become nullified. What's the problem with that? Why does Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch allow it? Because if he's not going to allow it, none of it will be able to be consumed. So there is a need. It's not stam you being mevatel iser. And but the chachamim, because of the rule that ein mevatel and iser lechatchila, the chachamim argue with Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Okay. So first we have a machlekes. You would argue machlekes yachid v'rabam halachi kerabim. So the Gemara is going through this in a very mesuded way. Rabbi Yaakov Givuloya quotes b'shem Rab Chanina koydem kol halachi kerab Elazar ben Aruch, which is gavaldik. So this will be one of the many exceptions. We had it already before. Yes, the rule is ein mevatlen isa lechatchila. Here there is a tzoyrech. There's no solution. If you don't have parnasim and markem acher, what are you going to do? What you're going to do is that you're going to make a verbal designation the right way, however that works, and knowing you're separating trumas ma'aser, and boom. Of course, if you don't have the ratio, it's not a solution. But we're speaking about a case where you do have the chulin against the trumas ma'aser has at least the 100-to-1 ratio or even more. Okay.
I'm still saying that ideally you should separate it from other protocols.
Oh, for sure, because everyone subscribes to Ein Mevatel and Isla Lechatchila, but this is not a Lechatchila the case according to Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Now hold on, let's see how we're getting some. Before we come back to our sugya, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan now will try to prove that it can be that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. But it's like, wow, from what? Mima shelimdu es hakoyhanois. Like I mentioned in the intro, it was common in the times of Chazal that when I wanted to make bread in my home, if there was a kohenes in the neighborhood that was from a family of chavedim, so they were very careful in remaining pure. It was common that I would ask these women kohanim to knead my doughs to separate challah. By the way, even if I wouldn't pay them, you know what ended up happening? All of these women that needed the doughs in the neighborhood, they took the challah. I mean, why not? So it was like a win-win. Okay. When would they separate challah? This is what I said in the beginning of today's daf. When do you separate? What did we learn in the Mishnah Aviv? First, need everything, separate challah. They didn't want to do it that way because they were going into a home of someone that was not so careful with tumah, not so knowledgeable with tumah and tara. And they were afraid that the longer they wait, don't forget, flour, especially if the grain after the ktsira never got wet, the flour, even if touched by a tamei mace, doesn't matter. It was never muksher to become tamei. But the moment you put the water in, I mean, that's the key. When you're kneading the dough, now everything became susceptible to becoming tamei. So they would separate ASAP. Now, don't forget, what did we learn in our Mishnah Aviv? If I separate challah from a dough that just started to be kneaded, but in the bowl I have a lot more. What's a lot more? I have unmixed flour in the amount of 5 revoyim, then my challah won't be effective for that. They wanted for the women to be able to separate challah even when there was more than 5 revoyim, and it should be effective for that. They figured out how to get around all of this. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, from the formula that we're going to see on Amud Beis, so hold your horses, from the formula of what the Chachamim taught these women kneaders to declare, to say, which would allow them to separate challah at the earliest stage possible and to be matir everything in the bowl, even when there was more than the shear. But we'll see what they were told to say. From that, l'choira, says Rabbi Yochanan, I'm going to prove to you that we do not paskin like Hadah, Amra, that not like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. So hold on. What did they teach the woman to say? Daf Chavav Amid Beis. Ma'alim dasar kayanos. Could even be that when Rabbi Yochanan said it, he didn't have to say more. People chat what he was saying, but we don't know the info, and we don't have the seichel. But let's begin with the information. She says like this: this woman separating challah, harei ze challah al hu'isa hazois. It's for this dough. So far, so good. I mean, this dough means for the part that's already mixed. Then va'al so'oid hamisarav ba, and on the sourdough that I'm yet to put in here. It's not even here, the sourdough. Va'al hakemach shenashtayir ba, and for the flour that's in this bowl that's not yet mixed, again, she would separate challah right away when she had a very small amount of dough. Va'al hakeretz sheniton tachtel, keretz are the small pieces of dough that when you make, remember we learned yesterday the Braisa, when you make those, in the beginning you have like little balls. Sometimes little pieces separate themselves. At the end of the kneading, the kneader gathers all of these kratzamlach and they mix it together. So in other words, we are acknowledging that when she separates the challah, there could be little pieces of dough here, there, not connected. She's saying it's for that. When will it be challah? Not now. If the woman is being mafresh challah now, what did we learn in the Mishnah Aviv? When she separates the challah, it's only good if the unmixed flour is a small amount, less than the shear. The moment you have the shear, that's already a davar chashuv. That will remain unrectified. So what she's being taught to say, she's separating challah, but she's basically saying, I don't want for this to become challah now. When will this become challah? She's putting it in the closet. She's putting it in her home. She's taking it in a place, Yakir, where it's where it's not where there's less chance for it becoming tummy. But she's saying,
what about Gemar Melacha?
Amazing, huh? She's taking it from the dough that was already kneaded. That's for sure. She's taking it from a little piece of dough. She's saying that this is for everything. Even though the Mishnah says that, if everything is 5 revayim, you're not good. I know that. But she's saying, you know when it's going to go into effect? In the future. Then, that's a big chiddush. It's almost like you're doing something l'davar shaloi bala oilam. There's a whole sugi about this. It's not called davar shaloi bala oilam because it's biyadai to make it. That's the way the Rishonim deal with this. There's a lot of.
What's the ending of the statement?
No. She's separating it. So, why not wait? She's afraid that the hostess is going to touch it. The problem is that she doesn't want to do something which won't fully solve the challah obligation. The Mishnah says that if you have 5 revaim, so all she needs to say is that what I'm doing right now is not going to be chal now. It's only going to be challah. She's mishayed. This should be a 24th of everything that will become needed by her. And then it's okay. So far, so good. First, that in itself is a chiddush. But then there was one concern. You know what the concern was? The concern is that from the piece that she separated to become challah later, maybe some of that will become tamei. Now let me explain, guys, remember the rules. If I have a piece of dough, Aviv, okay, if it's challah / truma, if it's tamei, what could the kohen do with it? He cannot eat it. He can use it, but he cannot eat it. If I have a piece of dough, and there's a way for me to say that if any part of it will become tamei, that I'm never making into challah. It will remain chulin. The benefit is that even if the kohen gets it, a kohen is allowed to eat chulin that's tamei. So they were so worried about maybe a piece here, a piece there. It means even in the challah itself, could be the challah will be broken into 2 pieces. And could be someone is going to touch a piece that and make it tamei. So she would declare, don't forget, she's making a separation. She's explicitly saying, not the way women right now, when a woman is mafresh challah right now, that is challah. She's saying, no, I'm making a separation. It should only go into effect when everything is finished. But she added, chutz min hatamei sheba. If a piece of this dough, if a piece in the challah separation will become tamei, the tamei part. Now, guys, if the tamei part is a kibetza, then it's going to impart tumah to everything else. You're doomed. But evidently, there was a possibility that even if the challah that was separated will become tamei, the part that might become tamei will be less than the size of a kibetza. Therefore, it will not be mitamei the challah. Everything will be given to the kohen, and the kohen can eat it all. The challah is tahira, and the rest that's tamei is chulin. Now, let me ask you a question. Why did she have to say chutz min hatamei sheba if we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Arach? What did Rabbi Elazar ben Arach say? Aviv, that in this case you could be mevatel isa lechatchila. I know we learned this in the previous Masechta. If you have a piece, let's go with challah. What were to happen if the tuma, the challah, the piece of challah that's tummy that's less than a kibetza, is part of something that's 100 times more than it? We're going with the premise the tuma will become batal also. If we're going to hold like the Chachamim that ein mevatlin is a lachatchila, so then the only solution, which is what they did, was for these women to say chutz min atame sheba. But now the question is, now that you are telling me that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, that in these scenarios where mevatel is a lachatchila, v'teimar hi, let this woman actually say that whatever I'm separating right now, all of it will become challah later. All of it. Even, she can even say, even the tamei part of it. But if a little part will become tamei, v'yala be'echad umeya. We're going with the premise that tuma also becomes batal be'echad umeya. So let all of what she designates for the future, let all of that be designated to become challah. Why are we b'chlal concerned that any part of it will become tamei? Only is araya, says Rabbi Yechanan, that we don't paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. We don't want to be mevatel tuma / isur lechatchila. So the only solution was for her to declare lechatchila that if any part of what I'm separating to become challah later will become tamei, it's not going to become challah. It has to remain chul. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan told us that there were two amirayim that pushed back, that showed us how we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, but it has nothing to do with our case. Two different ways. Who are the two Amirayim? Rab Shmuel Kaput Koya and the Chadmin Rabbanan, whose name we don't have. Which one said which? We also don't know. But one of these two, Chad Amar Kan, you know, in the Baraisa, Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch says that even if you don't have Parnasa Mimakam Acher, there's a solution. Shkoyach. That's only if the fact is that the amount of chulin is 100 to the ratio of the trumas meiser, which is why here it's okay to be mavatal iser. It's not called a lachatchila dika case, and there's going to be bittul. Kan b'sheyesh lekedei lahalois. In our case of Rabbi Yechanan is teaching how women who are hired or being asked in exchange to become kneaders, neighborhood kneaders, what's the best way for them to be mafresh challah to prevent problems? You don't know if some of what they separated became tamei. Maybe the amount will be a bigger amount. Maybe the remaining dough won't have 100 against it. You know, if there would be the ratio, it will become batal. How do you know it's going to become batal? Could be. Depends how little the tumah is, how big the rest is. We don't know that. So therefore, he says, let her declare if she's making a future stipulation. Let her avoid this altogether. V'kan b'she'ein ba kedei lahalos doesn't mean there'll never be, but there will be cases where there won't be. It makes so much sense. So it's much wiser if you're being mechanech people how to do things in a way where you're going to have a good afrashas challah, and the challah is going to remain tohoira, and the kohen will be able to eat it. The best way is to do exactly what they did, to make a stipulation that will prevent there being an issue, and then you have to go measure whether you had the ratio of 100 to 1 or not. That's one. Charna Amar, another one of these two, told Rabbi Yechanan, no, you don't have a raya mimashilim da'asakoyhenes against your psak, which is accurate. B'shem Rab Chanina. We do paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Why? Mekiven shuhu yachol l'sakein kemi sheyesh le'parnasim amakam acher. This is so good. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch never said that mevatlin isa lechatchila. The case of the Braisa was meiser rishon shaloi nitlo mimeno trumas meiser. So meiser tevel already fell into chulin. It happened already. There's nothing you can do if you don't have parnasim amakamacher. Nothing. Everything will become prohibited. No one can eat it. So he says, in that case, make a designation, even though you know the moment you made the designation, now you don't have tevel. Now you don't have a davar she'ein loy matirin. Now you have a davar. Now you don't have a davar sheyesh loy matirin. Now you have a davar she'ein loy matirin. Trumas meiser is fact. It's truma. It's holy. Finished. So it's you make a designation and it becomes batal. In our case, the woman didn't even do anything yet. You're telling her how to make a hafrasha to prevent a problem. Even Abu Lazar ben Arach will say in this case, you're trying to foresee what might happen and to prevent it. Yeah, some of what you separated might become tamei. It might happen. And the best thing is to declare lechatchila. If any part of my challah to be, not challah now, challah to be will become tamei, no longer that is challah. Machaya. And then you don't have to subscribe to bittul altogether. And even Abu Lazar ben Arach, Danny, that's what you said before. Even he says that if yesh le parnasim amarkamacher, then you're not declaring it. You're not quite ashamed. Why would you do that? Don't do that. Now I want to understand, just I'll be pnimius. Why would you think that a mevatlan is a lechatchila? Why don't we say dafka mevatlan is a lechatchila? Like, think about it. A davar ha'asr is something that's bad, right? So why not be mevatal it? What's the logic? The logic of davar sheyesh le matirin midrabanan is oiser b'cholshu. We said there's a Rashi. Everything makes a lot of sense. You would argue it's counterintuitive. Isn't our job to get rid of davar ha'asr? And the answer is that when people are the only way that I'm not going to make a mistake is if I understand how big the mistake is. The other direction, the people are mevatel isurim, nish gefährlich. They look at something prohibited and they don't see it as prohibited. That's the problem. The way by a davar ha'asr, what do Chazal say? That sheviras and zeu takonos. And I know this expression, we just had this in the Rambam. That's, technically when it comes to a klicheres, that doesn't have a tada in the mikvah, but the concept that you have to break it. People don't like breaking that part of themselves. They don't want to. It doesn't allow itself to be broken. Only when you see it for what it is. What is it? It's a davar ha'asr. It's ironic that dafke, when you're not mevatel le'isur, are you mevatel le'isur? When you minimize the isur, the isur is batel. Person says, I'm a good person. Every now and then I do things that are not good, but generally I'm a good person. Okay, you're not wrong by saying that, but you'll never change. Why? Because you were mevatel, you minimized your isur. Don't minimize the isur. See it for what it is, and then you can confront it, and then you'll do the right thing to it. Whether it's shivirasan zeh takonasan or however you make a hesapcha, but it begins, the rectification of a davar ha'asur is when you're not mevatel it. Mevatel it makes it worse. All right, Chevra, beautiful, to be continued.